today we're going to be discussing the signs that someone was raised by a narcissistic parent. So if you were raised by a narcissistic parent, chances are you grew up feeling like your house was a pressure cooker. You grew up feeling like at any moment a war could erupt. You grew up feeling afraid. You grew up feeling like you had to anticipate the needs of your narcissistic parent. You grew up feeling anxious. You grew up feeling like it was your job to manage the emotions of the narcissistic parent. Narcissistic parents can be extremely controlling. They can be possessive of you. They can make you feel and send you the vibe that it's your job to make the family proud. It's your job to basically come to planet Earth and make sure that you do absolutely everything to make them look good. So there's this lack of individuality. There's lack of an appreciation for you as a 3D autonomous being. It's almost like you and the narcissistic parent are joined at the hip. They are watching every single thing that you do. And almost every emotion they experience, you are responsible for. So if they feel proud, you are responsible for that because you adhered to their guidelines and their demands and you made them proud. You fit their ideal or you fit their idea of a success story, and so now they're proud. If they are unhappy, that's your fault too. You somehow screwed up. You disappointed them. You didn't do what they expected you to do. Maybe someone else's child did better than you on the SAT. And now the narcissistic parent makes it about them. And they send you the message that you failed them because you didn't get a grade as high as the next person. And so you can also feel like your parent was jealous of you. I've had clients who have shared with me that they've always felt as a female that their mothers were jealous of them. That if they brought home a boyfriend, then their mother would be complaining about how difficult it was to raise her children alone without a man and how lucky her daughter is that she gets to enjoy dating. You know, it's something that she could never do because she had to sacrifice her life for her children. Wanting to embarrass the daughter in front of the new boyfriend. I've had clients who have shared that their mothers have actually flirted with their boyfriends. Mothers who wanted to drink and party with the daughter's friends for competition. Wanting to triangulate the daughter against one of her best friends. Wanting to be this younger girl. Almost as if mom resents that her childhood was lost due to whatever choices she made as a result of whatever went on in her childhood. And now there's this projection of anger that is directed towards the daughter, even though she's not responsible for what happened to the mom in the mom's life. The daughter feels like mom is hostile and aggressive and even jealous that the daughter has any type of a social life. I've had male clients talk about how their narcissistic fathers were similar in that when they brought home a female, it was like dad suddenly wanted to pump out his chest and put on some cologne and embarrass my client and wanted to get my client's girlfriend to think well of the narcissistic father. There was competition at the dinner table with dad for the female's attention. And so it's not uncommon if you are the child of a narcissistic parent, whether you're male or female, to feel like the same-sex parent may have been jealous of you. In some cases, when it's the opposite sex parent, you might have a father wanting to turn a daughter into a little wife. So let's say there's been a divorce and dad never got over the divorce. Dad's highly immature, highly narcissistic, living below the veil of consciousness. And now you as the daughter are getting the feeling that, wow, dad is like, I feel like dad wants me to be an emotional replacement for my mom, and like, I'm not having it. Same thing with men. So if there's a divorce, mom is a single mom. Mom has high narcissistic traits, highly immature, and very dependent. She will use the son almost like a stand-in for a significant relationship. And the son will feel responsible for the mom, and oftentimes really doesn't have the verbal language to say, yes, that was me. Mom tried to turn me into her husband. Mom used me as an excuse to not date. And when I did not do what my mother wanted me to do, I was punished. And whenever I brought home a female, she hated the female. There was always a problem with whoever I brought home. And so these are just some of the things that you will feel if you grew up with a narcissistic parent. This is how they behave. So there's jealousy, there's possession, there is marginalization, there is competition, there is neglect. So if you grew up with a narcissistic parent, you may have felt, and you may even be aware, and maybe not even aware, of emotional neglect. You know, you can't miss something you've never had. And so I think lots of times, at least I see this in my 12-week breakthrough coaching program, I see clients who come into the class trying to work out what codependency is, trying to understand what happened to them when they come from homes where there was no overt abuse. So instead, they suffered abuse by omission rather than abuse by commission. And so what they were missing were the I love yous. What they were missing were the hugs. What they were missing was the attention. What they were missing was the affection. What they were missing was the connection. But it's not something that you can see. It's not tangible. And so very often, clients who come from homes where there was emotional neglect, when there is no compassion and no empathy for a child, they struggle with, well, maybe I really wasn't abused, and maybe I don't have a right to be in this coaching class, this healing coaching class, because I wasn't abused as much as Susie, or I didn't go through what Mark went through with his mom. And it can be very difficult for someone who has suffered emotional neglect to really appreciate the consequences this has had to their sense of self, to the way they view themselves, to the way they esteem themselves or not. And so if you came from a narcissistic home, you definitely suffered emotional neglect, sometimes physical neglect. You did not go to the doctor when you were supposed to. You did not get medical care when you were supposed to. Maybe you were kept home from school to clean the house, or to watch the siblings, or to take care of your mother when she was sick. It's not uncommon for children who come from alcoholic homes to be kept home from school to take care of the mother or the father who drank all night and is now sick and now needs help managing the younger children of the home. Narcissistic parents can be highly volatile. They can be very rigid. They can be very controlling. And so you're walking around on eggshells. They micromanage every area of your life. So no matter what's happening in your life, it's like they count your underwear. Like, I'm not kidding. They go through your drawers. They go under the bed. They go in every pocket in your closet, right? Your pant pockets, your shirt pockets. They're looking for something. They're very distrusting. And it's almost like they're looking for something to validate their anger towards you and to give them a reason to exercise their dominance and control over you. Now, I'm not talking about a parent who has a child who has a drug issue and is living at home, and the parents are turning the room over to look for drugs. That's what, in my opinion, healthy parents do. They're looking to make sure that their children are on the right path, and they suspect that there's drug use, and they need to know for sure whether or not their child has an addiction or a drug issue so it can be addressed. It can feel like a violation, but in my opinion, when there are drugs involved and you're a child and you're living at home, then in my opinion, parents have a right to figure out what's going on in their home. That's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about the parent, the narcissistic parent that is highly controlling, highly manipulative, that is abusive, verbally abusive, emotionally abusive, and is actually looking for reasons to pick on their child. And so going through their room and going through their backpacks and talking to their friends or whatever it is, the investigation that they're putting their children through, it offers the parent a sense of control over the child. And the parent is looking for something to grab onto to be able to exercise dominance over the child. I know that I came from a home where my mom, I felt like I was on a petri dish. Like I felt like a specimen. I remember thinking that my mom was in my head. I mean, the constant questioning, like the constant interrogation. I wasn't able to be a kid, and I was a good kid. But she fixated on me, and I think absolutely struggled with liking me, and I think projected a lot of her unhealed wounds from her own childhood with her mother onto me. And so I very much relate to feeling like I am an organism in a science lab and my mother is on top of me and there is nothing that I can do that feels like it's my own space. And losing the ability to feel safe, again, there go my shoulders, losing the ability to feel like you feel safe as a child and that there's some place in your life where you can just be a kid, where you can just play and laugh and joke around. So if you grew up in a narcissistic home or if you had a narcissistic parent that was on you, you did not feel like it was safe to be a child. And so I want to get to some of the symptoms and signs that indicate that you were raised by a narcissistic parent. So number one, you don't feel like you're good enough. You were raised with constant criticism, a lack of affection, inconsistent or non-existent nurturing. You never had enough positive mirroring from your parent. And so your brain never got the information that it needed to identify self as worthy. Right? We need to be mirrored from the outside. Our parents are our models for love. They are our models for self. And if this godlike creature that we need to survive is disappointed in us, can't stand us, disdains us, is indifferent to us, it is impossible for us to develop a healthy sense of self. Our ability to love the self, in my opinion, is very much in alignment with how well our parents were able to convince us that they loved us. And so if you grew up feeling like you were never good enough for your parents' love and affection, then you're carrying around this I am not enough stuff. And it's important that you know that that is not your fault, right? Number two, you struggle with complex PTSD. Now, this results from having to live with long-term trauma that you were unable to escape. So PTSD is related to an event, a tragic, traumatic event that you were unable to process in the moment. It was just too much, like you couldn't wrap your mind around it. Complex PTSD refers to, in most cases, what happens to a child who is dependent on the people who are causing them trauma. So if you are a child and you grew up with parents who abused you, emotionally neglected you, were indifferent towards you, and you were unable to feel safe, you were marinating in trauma. You could not see a light at the end of the tunnel. You did not think or you could not imagine how this was ever going to change. And so as a result, you end up feeling and developing complex PTSD as an adult. You struggle with emotional flashbacks, for instance, and a multitude of other issues. This is the result of having basic emotional, physical, mental, and spiritual needs go unmet, coupled with abuse by a parent you are dependent upon that you cannot escape. So over time, the child's ability to trust that the world is safe is eroded. So the ability to believe that you can trust other people is just gone. It's just dissolved. You can't trust that the people that you love are going to protect you. Parents can often offer intermittent affection, which confuses a child. So one day mommy's nice, the next day mommy's raging. The next day mommy's raging, the next day mommy's taking me out for ice cream. The next day mommy is raging again, the next day mommy's sorry because she raged all week. But on Monday she's raging again, or she's nowhere to be found, or daddy is abusive, or mommy is allowing daddy to be abusive. So it's this intermittent, you see me? You go from feeling seen to feeling invisible, to feeling disposable, to feeling like the people that you depend on think it's okay that they actually harm you in some way. You can experience feeling outwardly rejected as a child, which can cause complex PTSD. And this is over time. So children don't understand a parent's way of being can be wrong or evil or abusive. And so they spend their time either feeling guilty for not being able to gain their parents' affection, or they try to figure out how to gain their parents' affection. And so this is how we end up feeling like we're lost inside our own lives, because we're spending our lives either feeling guilty for something that we can't control, or we're in search of their approval. And so it becomes this hamster wheel experience inside our own hearts and our minds. It makes us feel very disconnected. Another sign that you were raised by a narcissistic parent is that you're someone who either consciously recognizes it, or you can live unconscious to this fact that you are someone who seeks approval. You are someone who naturally subjugates yourself to other people. You naturally give up your needs for the sake of other people. So in essence, this is related to never receiving the affection or the consistent nurturing that you absolutely deserved. And as a result, you might still be trying to close that psychological loop. Another sign that you were raised by narcissists is that you tend to attract narcissistic partners. Now, I think it's interesting that if you take the word partner and you take the word parent and you mix them up, you get the same word. I think that's really interesting. So we can actually attract people that mirror our parents' energy. This is us seeking approval, and we have to recognize that because this is the way that we were raised, we never received consistent approval. We end up seeking approval as children, trying to be good enough, trying to tone ourselves down, stuffing our feelings, not telling our parents that we don't feel well, trying not to make them angry, walking around on eggshells. And this creates literally deep neurological grooves in our brain. So these pathways become ingrained, and they develop and become subconscious patterns of thoughts. And these thoughts become beliefs over time. And then as adults, we're just repeating the past. Life is a hologram. And we are just expressing our childhood through these relationships. So our childhood is actually manifesting in the relationships that we have as adults today. And we really need to see these patterns, because you cannot fix a hole in the wall that you cannot see. Number 5, you might suffer from addictions. You may have started drinking early, or maybe you started smoking marijuana early, and maybe you even did other drugs early as a child. This was a form of escapism. And so now you recognize that perhaps being raised in a toxic home, feeling unloved, created tremendous pain inside of you. And it is very possible that if you struggle with addiction today and you were raised by narcissistic parents, your home was cold and rigid and unloving and abusive and all that wonderful stuff. If you came from that home and you struggle with addictions today, it may have started off as a way for you to escape the tremendous emotional wounds that you were carrying. Unfortunately, when it comes to addiction, we don't recognize when we're in the beginning stages of an addiction what addiction is. We don't recognize that it becomes literally a hamster's wheel, and that we are craving this escape. And once the escape is gone, we come back down again, and we're right back in the pain again. We're right back into our pain body. And so we've got to figure out a way to be able to embrace our pain and heal our wounds through validation, through accepting what's going on, through compassion and empathy. We have to find ways to embrace what's happening to us on an emotional level and not freak out about it mentally or spiritually, because when we stop and we figure out what happened to us, we're suddenly consciously in contact with anxiety and these physical body sensations. And we've got to stop judging these sensations, because all they are manifestations of the emotions that we have stuck in our body. And they're just evidence that something's wrong. And repressing this idea that something's wrong is only going to drive the addiction process even further. And so also NSSI is an acronym for non-suicidal self-injury. Child maltreatment has been shown to be associated with a large variety of different mental and physical health problems. Addiction is one of them. So addiction is an indicator of long-term effects of child maltreatment. And those of us who have dabbled with self-harm, who have come from narcissistic homes, it's important that if you feel shame associated with that, that you recognize that that's not necessary, that the maltreatment of a child can lead to these types of symptoms. So it's not your fault. So in other words, like if you are someone who self-harm and it's non-suicidal self-injury, in other words, like the self-harm is non-suicidal. So you cut, for instance. If this is something that you do, you have to recognize that it is an effect and the cause is maltreatment. It's not that you are dysfunctional. It's not that, although the behavior is not healthy, it's not something that you should take complete responsibility for as being the cause of why you do what you do. It is healthier to figure out a way to acknowledge that this is a symptom manifesting as a result of not getting what you needed as a child. So it is a consequence of some form of maltreatment. And that, in lots of the cases, that helps someone who's dealing with this feel less shame. I know of someone who recently came out of the closet when we came to light that she was self-harming, and it turns out that her father was an alcoholic, her mother was highly codependent, there was lots of arguing in the house, lots of fighting, lots of threats of divorce, sometimes physical violence, and she felt all alone, and she ended up cutting. And this was something that became her escape. And through recognizing through EMDR and through cognitive behavioral therapy, she's realizing for her, it was a consequence of the toxic environment that she was living in. And it helped her realize it really wasn't her fault. And so this might be something, if you know someone who is struggling with this, it's worth investigating and wondering if this person grew up in a home that was highly dysfunctional, toxic, and contained one or two narcissistic parents. So another sign that you grew up with narcissistic parents is that you dissociate. You may not even remember, so it's a sort of amnesia, what happened to you as a child, and that is not your fault. You can feel disconnected from your body. You can feel disconnected from the world around you. You might struggle with, who am I? Like, really, who am I? You can struggle with an identity issue. Again, not your fault. You didn't have a safe, nurturing environment to explore yourself. So things are a little confused for you. And the good news is that once you acknowledge what was wrong, you can surround yourself with supportive people and make up for lost time. There's a loss of feeling. In other words, like you can feel emotionally numb also. And two of the best known ways to treat dissociation is cognitive behavioral therapy with a trained therapist, especially a trauma therapist that understands dissociation and why it is a defense mechanism and oftentimes a survival technique, and EMDR. So if this is something that you're struggling with, the good news is you can work with people that can help you reconnect with your body. We have lots of different body systems, but to make it simple, you have a physical body, you have a mental body, and you have a spiritual body. And our goal is to create integration. Learning to integrate the physical body with the mental body and the spiritual body leads to tremendous recovery. And CBT and EMDR are just two ways that you can stay on that path if this is something that you're struggling with. So another thing that you might do is you might be incredibly self-critical. So your inner dialogue is nearly 100% self-negative talk. So you learned early to feel guilty and to believe that whatever you experienced in your childhood was your fault. So if mommy was upset, it was your fault. If the family wasn't proud, it was your fault. If the family failed, it was your fault. If your brother failed his test, it was your fault. If mommy drank, it was your fault. If daddy beat mommy, it was your fault. As a result, you never had healthy mirroring. You never had someone stand there and empathize with you. There's a lack of empathy when you have narcissistic parents. And so you don't have empathy for the self. And so you really carry around the weight of this dysfunctional family and feel responsible for it. So you're tied to guilt and you're tied to shame. And this really manifests as negative self-talk. Another sign that you were raised by a narcissistic parent is that you subjugate your needs for others. So you tend to be codependent, and the codependency is rooted in shame. You were unable to gain the love that you needed from your parents, and you feel responsible for it. You grew up feeling guilty and ashamed because you were unable to gain their love. You were gaslit as a child and humiliated, possibly. You experienced some form of sexual abuse and maybe even incest. And all of this leads to incredible shame. You're feeling less than. In order for you to grow up and be able to put your needs ahead of someone else's needs, you need to feel like you have a healthy sense of self. You need to feel like you matter. And so if you grew up in a home where you did not get the sense that you mattered, as an adult, it's very easy for you to exhibit codependency. So you lack a true identity. And this behavior manifests in people-pleasing, acquiescing, rescuing, enabling, and denying your own needs for the sake of others because you seek approval. And you're hoping that you'll be able to gain the approval of someone else by subjugating your own needs. So another sign is that you're an adult and you still live in fear over what your parents think of you, what they say, and what they do. So you're still seeking their approval and you live in fear of truly telling your truth. So you are a grown-up human being. You've graduated from college or you have your own career, living on your own, paying your own bills, and you are still terrified over the idea of disappointing your parents. They still have control over you. And so you haven't cut the invisible cord, right? The umbilical cord was cut at birth, but this dysfunction has created a dysfunctional cord, apron strings, if you will, and you haven't yet been able to mentally or emotionally or spiritually cut the cord. Sometimes you don't know that you're still afraid of what your parents think. In my case, I was in my mid-30s, highly in a dysfunctional marriage, very unhappy. I was suffering migraine headaches, developed adult onset asthma, panic attacks, and I wanted a divorce. And I did not think that I had a right to be unhappy. I thought that there was some, I didn't have, in other words, like, some people struggle with, they don't feel like they have a right to be happy, and I get that. I was so codependent that I didn't think that my unhappiness was valid. I really thought that I needed my ex-husband's permission to feel my feelings. That's how disconnected I was from my feelings. Like someone had to step in and say, oh yes, Lisa, you have a right to feel that way. I was seeking permission. As an adult, in the back of my mind, and it took me a while on the recovery process to work this out, to journal it out, to find out what was this root fear. But I absolutely had a fear of telling my parents the truth because I had grown up with them telling me that I was selfish. And so I knew that if I said to them, I want a divorce, that's probably what was going to come out of their mouth. And it did, at least from my mother. And my father, his wisdom was, why do you want to get a divorce? And when I said, I'm incredibly unhappy, he won't go into therapy or he won't stay in therapy. Like, we can't get from point A to point B. I am absolutely dying in this relationship. And he said, who said you have to be happy? And I looked at my mom, whose face just fell, because this was a codependent woman who had completely subjugated herself to make this more narcissistic man happy. And here he was saying that I didn't have a right to be happy. And he went as far as to say, do you think your mother and I are happy? And I thought, wow, I'm not going to go out like that at all. So that conversation definitely impacted me. And I could see the narcissism play out in their relationship, and I can see the consequences of it, and I can see the dangers of staying in a narcissistic relationship that drains you day by day. So a major sign is that you're a grown-up person taking care of yourself, and you're still afraid of what your parents think about you. So number 10 is that you can identify your feelings, but you tend to stay in your head. So you rely on doing, and you keep yourself really busy rather than being. It's difficult for you to feel your emotions and even your pain and validate your emotions. So you're someone who looks from the outside like you have everything together, but you're not checking in with yourself. People will accuse you of being flat. People will accuse you of being highly intellectual. People will accuse you of having good intentions, but they're unable to get to the heart of you. It's not like you believe that you're numb. It's not like you're aware that you're numb. It's, in fact, you think that you're doing really, really well. And it's only when someone points out to you that you're very good at keeping busy, you're very good at doing a lot of things, and you travel the world, and you have, a $30 million business, and you have 1,000 employees, but I don't really know who you are. And you're not even aware of that. But people who really love you will say to you, will complain to you and say, maybe you should slow down. Maybe we can just talk and just sit down and watch a movie, and we don't have to do a million different things. Can we just sit still? So this might be a sign that you're raised by a narcissistic parent. You have busied yourself, and you've learned that you can run away from this internal emptiness by doing. And your life looks pretty good. Another sign is that you doubt that you have a right to believe your childhood was dysfunctional. Narcissistic parents lack empathy for their children's needs. So you never heard, I'm sorry, and if you did, your parents never changed. There may have been a ton of apologies, but nothing ever changed. The rage was still there. The neglect was still there. The verbal abuse was still there. Whatever you experienced, it was still there. The mocking of you and humiliating you, it was still there. Now, the thing that you might struggle with, your sibling might say to you, listen, our family was dysfunctional, and you might be like, no, it wasn't. You might not feel like you have a right to acknowledge how you really feel. You might feel like it's wrong for you to admit to the fact that your family was dysfunctional. Even though you have a ton of symptoms, you attract narcissistic partners, you may struggle with alcohol addiction, you might struggle with the ability to maintain relationships with friends, you might distrust people, your sister and your brother are telling you like, our family was not that healthy, but you're the one that's more in denial about it. And so this is a sign. If you've got siblings who are saying, this was our life, and you are exhibiting codependency, and you attract abusive partners over and over and over, you may be in denial of how difficult your relationship was with your parents as a child, and that could be because your parents lacked empathy for you. Remember, empathy is that magic emotion that allows you to feel valid, like your emotional self feels recognized. You had a witness. And when that is exploited in you as a child and you don't have a witness, you can end up being and living in denial of how dysfunctional your childhood was. Another sign is, number 12, is that you may fear criticism and you can be highly reactive. And as a defensive mechanism to protect your vulnerabilities, you've learned to stay hypervigilant. And this hypervigilance is actually you scanning the environment for the next possible attack. So this is an ego defense mechanism. As a child, you never figured out how you were able to make your parents happy, and as a defense, you learn to be the person who has to stay on guard all the time, and you are highly sensitive to criticism, and you will bite someone back even if it is slightly perceived by you that they may have criticized you in some way, even if this person never intended to criticize you. You may be so sensitive that you see sleights of hand even when they're not there, and it does happen. This is someone who has been mocked as a child, gaslit as a child, and who's just not having it, and is so afraid of being bullied as an adult that they see themselves being bullied, sometimes even when they're not. This is someone who is very difficult to talk to. You're having a conversation with this person, just a mild conversation, and they attack you with, what is that supposed to mean? I know what you meant. And you meant nothing. But they are so sensitive that they're difficult to talk to. And this is a sign. If you know someone like this, or if you struggle with this, ask yourself, what was your family environment like? And if this is something that's causing a problem in your life, it may want to be something that you want to investigate, possibly with a trauma therapist, with a cognitive behavioral therapist, or maybe even go into EMDR and investigate so that you can unlock the emotions that are making you feel like your skin is on fire and you need to protect yourself. So another sign is that your parents singled you out as a child and you were the family scapegoat. If you grew up in a home with alcoholism, you could have been the scapegoat child, right? So if you are from a home where the children in the home, one is the scapegoat, one is the hero child, one is the golden child, this is a sign that you were raised by a narcissistic parent, because healthy parents don't do this. Healthy parents don't pit children against one another, right? Healthy parents don't single out a child, make this child the scapegoat, displace all the family's dysfunction on this child. So let's focus on this child so we don't have to deal with mommy's alcoholism. Or let's focus on this child's, failed grade so we don't have to deal with daddy's addiction or what's happening between mommy and daddy. Let's focus on Johnny so we don't have to deal with our stuff. So poor Johnny becomes like the family garbage can. And he feels the weight of it. And when he reacts to the weight of it, everybody points the finger at Johnny and say, see, look at him. Look how difficult he is. And it's very, very difficult to be this child. So if you are Johnny, or if you grew up as the golden child and you know that your parents did this to one of your siblings, this is a sign that you were raised by a parent who struggled with narcissism or high narcissistic traits. Number 14. You and your siblings can't get along as adults. There's no talking to your brother. Your brother wants nothing to do with you. You want nothing to do with your sister. You guys hardly ever talk to each other. And it's only when you absolutely have to that you deal with one another at all. So it seems like what you learned in childhood, the lack of boundaries, the pitting of you against your siblings. So if your mother triangulated you and spoke poorly about your brother to you, or vice versa, this is still playing out. And it's so unfortunate. This is one of the saddest things that I think happens when you're raised by parents, is that your relationships with your siblings is so difficult and almost non-existent in some cases. And it's just not fair. Siblings' relationships are meant to be incredibly joyous, bonded experiences. I mean, your siblings know what it was like to grow up in your house. But when there's a lack of respect, when there's a lack of empathy, when there's a lack of boundaries, when there is gaslighting, when there is scapegoating, when there is indifference, when there is maltreatment of children, children are put into a state of survival. It's very difficult for them to trust their family members and sometimes anybody when they grow up in this type of an experience. It's not uncommon for sibling relationships to be broken because they were raised in a narcissistic family environment. Number 15. So if you were raised by a narcissistic parent, you can become narcissistic yourself, develop high narcissistic traits, or become codependent. So narcissism and codependency are, in my opinion, are two sides, opposite sides of the same coin. Both a narcissist and a codependent have struggled extenuating, difficult childhood experiences at the hands of, in most cases, their parents or their primary caretakers. They have been unable to escape their trauma, so both experience complex PTSD. It's the way it manifests that's so interesting. So you can have narcissistic traits, and you can develop high narcissism in reaction to living with an abusive parent. And some children develop codependency, as I said, which is the opposite side of the same coin. When it comes to high levels of narcissism, children can mirror the aggression of their parents, the entitlements, and the lack of empathy, and can learn to be unforgiving and punitive. In some cases, the narcissistic parent will actually encourage their children to feel entitled, to think better about themselves than they do other people. What I mean by that is you can raise a child and teach them that everyone is beneath them. So if you have a highly narcissistic father, for instance, who is grandiose in his sense of self, he can teach a child and mirror this to the child and have the child develop and absorb this sense of grandiosity themselves. So they go to school and they're the bully. They go to school and they feel entitled. These are people who feel entitled to take advantage of other people because their parents have taught them that they're actually better than other people. Or the narcissism is created out of a defense mechanism. It's a way to hide and shield their vulnerabilities from the world. It's a way to be in a relationship with people but not really be in a relationship with people. Codependency is the opposite side of the same coin, where a child has learned that in order to feel seen, they must acquiesce. They must people please. And they will fawn after people as a way to gain a sense of self and worth from people. Where narcissists feel entitled to your affection and your admiration. A codependent doesn't feel entitled to it, and a codependent feels like they have to earn it. A child who seeks a sense of love and a sense of self can channel this need into people-pleasing behavior as a way to seek and gain love and affection, as it is with the codependent. Or a child can try to recover or compensate for the deep feeling of inferiority and their sense of deficiency by developing an inflated ego, and through lies and/or develops, along with the lies, a false self. So codependents seek validation through others as a way to feel good, and they feel like a way to feel like they have a self that is worthy. So if I'm taking care of you, that's where I'm getting my identity from, right? So that's myself. I am worthy if I can make you happy. I am worthy if I can gain your approval. So a narcissist, however, has an inflated sense of self. It's a delusional state of being. They live in an illusion. A narcissist has an inflated sense of self. It's an illusion. It's not reality. And so a codependent seeks a sense of self through caretaking. A narcissist develops this inflated sense of self. They live in this illusionary world where they are superior to other. They are superior to you. They are superior to everyone else that they know. People are inferior to them. And a narcissist feels entitled to exploit the vulnerabilities of a narcissist. A major difference between a narcissist and a codependent can change. A codependent wants to change. A codependent can recognize that they're gaining their sense of self and their sense of self-identity from caretaking. And they can recognize how controlling that is and manipulative that is even, and they want to change it. Not so with a narcissist, because they don't understand a cause and effect. Another sign that you've been raised by a narcissistic parent is that you don't know how to properly express anger. So if your parents were verbally abusive and punitive, you might shut down when you're angry. This is a patterned response. You may fear abandonment. You may shut down and stuff your anger rather than express your emotions and explore their meaning. So if you were raised in a house that was volatile, you knew that you had to tone yourself down so not to make your parents angry because you feared losing their approval. As an adult, you might not recognize that you're still suppressing and toning yourself down and not dealing with anger appropriately. And this is when anger can come out sideways. This is how codependents walk around incredibly resentful. They don't tell their truth. They fear abandonment. They fear making other people angry. And so they implode personally. They can be passive aggressive and they can have comments that come out sideways, and it's very dysfunctional, very unhealthy. So if you don't know how to process your anger properly, that's also a sign that you were raised by a narcissistic parent. Another sign, we're leading into that, is that you don't know how to ask for what you need. You prefer that people read your mind. You're afraid to speak up. And you never felt worthy of being heard. You never had the experience of being validated or heard. Your needs were kind of like just cast over. Your needs were irrelevant. If you spoke up, you were humiliated. You were called selfish. You were told to look at how much your mother did for you. How dare you want more? Look at how much your father did for you. How dare you want more? You could have holes in your shoes and want a pair of shoes. And it could be completely obvious that you need a pair of shoes, but a narcissistic parent will turn it around. They lack empathy for you, and this is their opportunity to shame you and make you feel bad for having a need. As an adult, it might not be so easy for you to express yourself in a healthy way. Number 18, you lack boundaries. So people consider you a pushover or a doormat. You don't ever say no. You'll be accused of not having a backbone. People who care about you might go and tell you that other people are taking advantage of you and that you need to set a boundary. So if this is something that you've experienced and it's more than once, and these are people who love you, you really need to look at that. Because people who can't set boundaries are generally people who lack a sense of self. And there's always a reason when you lack a healthy sense of self. You haven't felt mirrored as a child. You haven't had enough consistent nurturing as a child. You haven't felt safe. You've learned to live in survival. And so people have been walking over your boundaries. There was absolutely no ability for you to have a safe place. Your things were fair game. Like what you owned, people just took from you. So there was no level of respect for you. So you haven't developed it for yourself. So you might be oversensitive to the needs of others. You might feel guilty and over-responsible for making other people happy. You still seek approval. You fear abandonment if you say no. You're afraid to have others get angry at you. You don't know how to stand up for yourself. And as a result, you might bump into people who exploit that in you, maybe at work, maybe in a friendship, maybe in a relationship. So the goal is to integrate your physical, mental, and spiritual body so that you develop the ability to observe what's happening to you on an emotional and physical level or a mental level. And you're able to consciously work this out so you are embracing everything that happened. So oftentimes when we come from dysfunctional homes, we're running from our truth, right? We have all these family secrets, and we think if we put on enough lipstick and we get thin enough and we make enough money and we have the most amazing job, we can run from these truths as if it's our fault that this happened to us, as if it's our fault that our family is our family. I learned to just embrace everything, to acknowledge everything, and it took many years, but I eventually moved into a state of forgiveness. I know sometimes people reach out to me and they say, I'll never forgive. I get that. Sometimes anger is the only thing separating you from imploding, and I get that. So if you need to be angry and that makes you feel safe, then that's what you need for now. In terms of what happened to me, I felt like I needed to get to a place where I understood things from the eye in the sky. from a truly spiritual perspective, recognizing that my father was the adult child of an alcoholic, a violent alcoholic who was highly abusive, who was domestically abusive to his mother and his stepmother, and whose natural mother committed suicide. Recognizing that that was my father's childhood, I eventually developed empathy for him once I had my own empathic response to my own childhood. It was just easier to have empathy for him once I stood in as my own witness to what was happening or happened to me as a child. And same for my mother. Once I developed the ability to acknowledge what happened to me and I began the process of integration, I was able to then get to a point mentally and emotionally where I was able to observe my own mother as a child, and that's when empathy for her began to move in. But not before I was able to witness my own inner child. I created meditations that I listened to on my own. I did tons of journaling about my own inner child's experience, and I learned to feel my feelings. I stopped dissociating. I stopped doing. I learned to just be still. And it took time, but you can do it. So what can you do? So you can keep a journal. You can journal today about how you respond to other people in the normal course of a day. So do you feel safe? Do you trust people? Do you tend to be passive aggressive? Do you stuff your feelings? Do you lie? Do you lack boundaries? Do you wish that you could tell people your truth? What is your truth? What truth was robbed from you as a child? Journal about your emotions. Journal about the thoughts that show up when you start to ask yourself these questions. Validate your inner child's experiences and the emotions that went ignored when you were a child. So you're developing empathy for yourself. Now, do not focus. Get this out of your head. Switch your focus up. Do not focus on how other people focus on you, or do not focus on how you think other people see you. When you struggle with feeling dissociated, you are already tremendously self-conscious. And in my own opinion, lots of times we are so overwhelmed with what other people are thinking about us, the way we look, the way we dress, the way we speak, how we respond. And so it's important that when you're journaling, you kind of like you're aware of it, but you put that on the shelf and you say to yourself, no, my journaling is going to be about how I feel about myself. It's going to be about how I experience the world. Why? So I can see the holes in the wall. So I can start to make connections. So I understand myself. So I can embrace my inner child. So I can understand my foundation of myself as a child. That's why we journal from this perspective. So try to silence the opinions of others inside your head. The other thing that you can do is ground yourself every single day. Learn what it means to focus on your surroundings, right? The chair that you're sitting in, the sounds of the room, the temperature of the room. Focus on your breathing. This is you coming back to the self. Again, the goal is integration. You want to integrate the physical body, the mental body, and the spiritual body, and you can't do that if you're stuck in your head. You can't do that if you're people-pleasing. You can't do that if you're subjugating yourself. You can't do that if you're worrying about what everyone else thinks of you. You just can't. And so journaling and grounding yourself and stilling your mind is going to help you integrate more fully. The next thing you do is practice mindfulness. So reconnecting with the physical body and with the mental and conscious body and your future spiritual body. So the spiritual body is accepting all of you, all of your symptoms, all of the codependency. Even if you have narcissistic traits, it's like, I'm just accepting them. You accept all your insecurities, all of your fears, and all of the trauma. So your spiritual self accepts everything that shows up on the mental plane and accepts everything that shows up on the physical plane. Every body sensation, every ounce of anxiety, every looped thought, it just accepts everything. Your higher self or your spiritual body becomes the nurturing mother or the nurturing father you always needed, or the balance of the female and male energy you always needed. I call this give yourself a get out of jail card. So forgive yourself and force yourself to focus on things that you love to do. Get out of jail. Get out of your mindset if it's negative. Stop berating yourself, right? When you berate yourself, you're sticking yourself in emotional jail. So give yourself a get out of jail card. Go do something that you enjoy. Whatever it is. It might be singing. It might be drawing. It might be writing. It might be volunteering. It might be cooking. It might be creating TikTok videos. Who knows? Whatever floats your boat. Whatever floats your boat. Just get out and do it. Get out in nature. Do yoga. Connect with people if that's what you want to do. But just make sure that you are forcing yourself, literally forcing yourself to do things that you like to do. Exercise and eat right. Flow love to your body through nutrition, through yoga, through walking. Find ways to tell your body, I love you. This is your mental body and your physical body as well as your spiritual body integrating. You're learning to acknowledge that you have a body. Your mental mind is making a decision. Your higher self is giving you the desire to do so. And this is how you can connect more deeply and integrate mind, body, and soul. So the last thing I'd like to suggest is that you get enough sleep. You get up every day at the same time because this is going to help regulate you with powerful universal regulating energy. So there are universal laws that govern time and space. And I firmly believe that the more we come into alignment with these universal laws, the more we are able to work with positive universal laws, we evolve rather than devolve. Even if our parents were highly destructive, we can take all of that and turn our lives into something completely constructive. We can build our life back brick by brick in spite of what the past has been, but we have to start somewhere. And sometimes I think where we have to start is just acknowledging all of the holes in the wall. So that's why I create YouTube videos, I create podcasts, and I write articles, and tons of my social media is tied to what went wrong. Because if I don't know what went wrong, I'll never be able to understand why as an adult I keep messing up. Why as an adult I still feel unworthy. Once I realize, once my logical mind says, oh, that feeling of not enoughness is tied to never being able to gain my mother's approval and feeling rejected by her, no wonder I still seek approval. It's almost like once the logical mind understands the emotional mind, incredible healing can take place. It's like bells and whistles go off. Light bulbs are going off. It's still not the end of the road. That's just the beginning. Because at that point, you need to reprogram yourself and you need life skills. You need knowledge. You need support. And you need guidance to build your life back up again. Because we have been arrested emotionally in childhood. And although we look like adults, we are lacking necessary life skills to expand our lives in positive directions. So we have to enhance our emotional IQ. We have to become awakened. We have to wake up. Our parents might still be asleep, but the only way we can heal is if we awaken to what went wrong and then move forward each and every day, even if it's at a snail's pace. It's better than not moving at all. Namaste, everybody. Thank you so much for being here. My name is Lisa A. Romano. I'm the Breakthrough Life Coach. And if you'd like to learn about my online healing codependency programs, if you'd like to learn about my audio trainings to help you heal from codependency, if you'd like to learn more about my Loving the Self video and meditation program, or if you just want to download a meditation or an audio product of mine, all you have to do is go to www.lisaaromano.com. You can also find me on my podcast. It's located everywhere. It's called Breakdowns to Breakthroughs. And you can also find me on Insight Timer, the world's largest meditation app. Namaste, everybody. Until next time. And please, when you're out and about, don't forget to think. Bye for now. If you love this content, check out the next video. And don't forget to click the link below so you can take the codependency quiz. I talked to him online for 6 months before I met him, and he did a fabulous job brainwashing me to believe what a wonderful and upstanding citizen he was long before I ever met him. So by the time, I didn't even see it coming. By the time I met him, I thought he was like the salt of the earth. Although I had absolutely zero, and I mean zero evidence, nada, no proof whatsoever that really could back that feeling up.